Good afternoon, everybody. Okay,
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hi, good afternoon.
good afternoon, everyone. This
Hi.
is Bassam Haddad, and with me is my fantastic co host and the fearless leader of this podcast, Jessica Holland. How are you, Jessica?
I'm great. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. How are you,
Well,
Bassam?
it could be more wonderful. It was a bit short actually, but I'm very excited. I'm very excited to be sharing our next installment, the second installment of Search Files podcast. This is episode 2, and it's on think tank experts and teaching modules. And we have with us three fantastic guests that Jessica will introduce. In the meantime, I just want to say that one of the major things we're working on at MESPI, at the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, is our teaching modules. Which are really important pedagogical tools that address various sorts of lesson plans on a particular topic. And with us today are two of the coordinators of two teaching modules on the environment and Islam. And we will get to that in a little bit. I'll actually say a little bit more about the teaching modules as we begin speaking with our guests. So I will, so that we don't delay the start of the show or the podcast, and I will turn it over in the meantime to Jessica.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bassam. So, in the first part of the podcast, focusing on knowledge production, we will be talking to one of our guests and exploring the sources used by think tank experts and journalists, as well as some innovative ways of tracking and visualizing this data and the potential biases within it. So, Alejandro Paz will enlighten us. So, I'll just introduce Alejandro. Should be on the call. Here we go. Hi, Alejandro. How are you?
Hi there, Jessica. Nice to see you, and Bassam. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for
Great
coming.
to
So I'll
have you.
just introduce you briefly to our listeners. So Alejandro is a associate professor of anthropology at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and he has written about the politics of migration, language, and citizenship in Israel Palestine, as well as settlement in occupied East Jerusalem. His book, Latinos in Israel, Language and Unexpected Citizenship, was published in 2018. His current research is about English language, Israeli online journalism, and its impact on North American public opinion, which is what particularly we'll be focusing on today. So, thank you so much, Alejandro, for coming on. And I'll kick us off by perhaps you could start speaking about the your own ethnographic research that sort of led you to develop the MediaCat tool before we start speaking about the direct involvement with KPP.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jessica. What really caught my interest was the huge growth in Israeli news organizations and in writing news, publishing news in English over the knots and the last decade. So basically, the last 25 years, as more and more newspapers went online, Israeli newspapers went online, they simultaneously started to experiment with English language versions, even if they weren't in English language newspapers beforehand. And so I got interested in who were the people doing these news organizations, who are the journalists, especially editors and translators, and how do they make decisions about coverage of issues, especially from the region, Israel, Palestine, the Middle East, and North Africa more broadly, for an audience outside of the region, right? So most of these editors and journalists really see their audiences being based in the North Atlantic. They try to publish things, for just to give you one quick example, at 7 a.m. New York time, right? So that tells you something about who they really think their audience is. All right, and that's changing and it's growing and expanding the audiences as well. So it tells you some. So I was really interested in who are these people and how they make decisions about coverage. It tells you something also about how they perceive themselves outside of the region. Is the state of Israel, I like to say, has always been constituted as much in the North Atlantic by North Atlantic imperial powers as by the people living there. And so that reflection on how we're being viewed abroad is very important. So maybe that's why I wanted to do that research, and learn more about how these journalists are producing news for audiences around the world, and especially the North Atlantic.
Thank you. Yeah, I think ASI's listeners will be really interested in the kind of connections that you're tracking and the research that you're working on to sort of lay out how these connections are actually taking place and how that influence in North American public opinion is developing. I wonder, I think our audience will be less familiar with the digital tools that you use to sort of construct these data sets that help to make those analyses. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about MediaCat or about the digital humanities tools in general that you use.
Yeah, sure. So I was left because I'm interested in, on the one hand, ethnographically, to see how these sites are being produced, who are the people involved. On the other hand, I'm really interested in who's picking up on it. And one of the things I noticed very early on, I think actually it was a story about Noam Chomsky back in 2010 being denied entry into, I think, I'm sorry about the construction noise above me. So it was I'm sorry?
It sounded a little bit like censorship as soon as you
Oh,
started.
okay, yeah. Bad timing. Bad timing. Oh my goodness. I can. Shall I continue? Okay. So I on one day it was, I think it was reported, for those who knows who know the. Okay, should I get on my laptop and maybe go to another room where maybe we'll be quieter?
I think this is actually entertaining.
Okay.
In the sense that
I'm so sorry.
in the
It was
sense
nice and
that
quiet here until
in the sense
2 seconds
Jessica,
ago.
what Jessica said, it's the timing is immaculate.
No,
Maybe we should do what people do when they are being censored is raise our voice.
Okay, I'll talk. I'll try to talk loud and
Feel
hopefully.
free.
So there was a story about Noam Chomsky being denied entry. I think at the Allenby Bridge, he was on his way to give a lecture at Birzeit University, if I remember correctly, and it came out. I'm pretty sure it was Amira Haas from Haaretz who broke the story. And the next day, I did a search on the story, and it was all over. You could like pretty much any news organization, the Guardian, the New York Times, all had versions of this story up, and many, many more. And so I suddenly started to pay attention to the fact that news organizations were constantly citing Israeli journalism, Israeli English journalism in particular. And I became curious, well, how can we study that? So I'm an anthropologist. I do ethnography, participant observation. Working with people, interviewing them, learning about what they do in that way. And so I didn't have any background, but I got into a partnership, kind of in digital methods. But I got into a partnership with a librarian at our university, who leads what's called the Digital Scholarship Unit. Her name is Kirsta Stapelfeld. And I asked her this question, is there some way to find all the times that, for example, the New York Times cites a set of Israeli English language news organizations? And so out of that question came a tool which we call MediaCat. And MediaCat tries to, it's kind of these two crawlers. It crawls web domain. If you wanted to crawl a web domain, so the people, the researchers who are interested will say, crawl these web domains, please. And then it does an analysis on the news stories, looking for example, hyperlinks. What are the sources used in that story by a hyperlink? Or it can also look for a set of keywords like the names of the news organizations. So that's a kind of a brief introduction. And then the user will get this data set of all the news stories, or we also look at Twitter, all the tweets of given news domains or journalists or in what we're doing with KPP, think tank experts and think tanks, every time they cite a set of news organizations. So we're interested in looking at these data sets and seeing who's citing whom. Like, when does the New York Times, for example, cite Haaretz, or when does it cite Times of Israel, or whatnot, and for what purposes? So, what kinds of facts, what kinds of quotes are they hoping to get out of these citations?
Fantastic, thank you. And thanks so much for drawing attention also to that partnership sort of across university departments with the librarian. I'm coming from a background in libraries and archives, so it's really great to sort of see how these projects can both drive research forward and seeing digital scholarship kind of in action in that way. So I think if we turn to a sort of a specific event, or perhaps if you could talk about some examples from your previous research or from the KPP crawl, although it's quite early days with that project. Could you speak about how the sort of combination of following journalists, the sources that journalists are using, as well as what the think tank experts are therefore reading in the news, can sort of combine to affect the discourse on controversial events across the world? So perhaps thinking of the ethnic cleansing in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem earlier this year, or perhaps any other event that has you've sort of seen or been able to track the responses within your data.
Yeah. So we're still in early days, but what I think maybe one thing to remember is, or one thing to maybe say at the beginning is, we're interested in two kinds of experts. And when I came to you guys and said, I have this tool which can crawl, and maybe we can find the ways that experts cite each other, and thus produce knowledge in ways that rely on each other's work. And so I think it's really interesting to think about these journalists and the think tank experts as this group of experts who read each other a lot and who are constantly probably citing each other. That's what we hope to explore, at least. So as you mentioned, Jessica, we're still early in the research, but just to give you like one example, someone from the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, Jonathan Shancer, has already come out with a book about the events, the invasion of Gaza, the very violent struggle in Sheikh Jarrah and across Israeli cities, the events in May. And he's very much focused in a kind of think tank geopolitical angle on Hamas's connection to Iran. And in interviews that have been published with him, he talks about Sheikh Jarrah as just a real estate dispute. So that tells you a little bit about the political angle that he takes. And this is somebody who is constantly tweeting with references, with citations of Israeli English journalism. Not only, but he's constantly in conversation with Israeli journalists in that way. And so what we're doing with KPP is we've come up with a scope of Twitter handles that we're crawling, and then we're going to see when it is that these experts cite each other, right? How much they cite each other, when they cite each other, and to what purpose. We'll be able to look at kind of granularly when those tweets with citations come in.
I think
I'm being major censored.
Every time you talk about think tanks, this is happening. So and this is about think tanks. So I don't know what we can do. And but I just saw on the feed that people can hear you very clearly despite the construction.
Okay, so thank you so much, Bassam, for confirming.
That seems like an excellent metaphor for activism and the motivations behind it. People can hear you clearly. They are listening despite the incredible
Great.
No, I'm shouting. I don't know if this makes it better or worse. Thank you for outlining the early results from our current project. I think I speak for myself and Bassam here, I think we'd love to have you back on the podcast later on, or perhaps some other ASI broadcast channel to hear some of the results and see what happens with that.
And
I would love that, and I promise to have a quieter.
no, this is actually, if you can reproduce this reality, it would be really interesting. Before you leave, I'd like you to meet our next guest, Professor Peter Mandaville, who's my friend and colleague at George Mason. So I'm going to bring in Peter. Let me see how we can do this. There we go. Peter Mandaville is a professor at CHAR, whom Jessica will introduce, but I wanted you guys to meet before you leave, given that there might be some overlap in our work. Peter is running the Islam teaching module, and Alejandro just presented that fantastic bit about the search function that we're working with Alejandro and his unit at the university on. So Alejandro and Peter meet each other.
Hi, Alejandro. How are you?
Great. Nice to meet you, Peter.
Nice to meet you as well.
And
I was also listening to your section a bit, and it was fascinating, and especially with the special sound effects.
Brilliant. Okay, so Bassam, shall I go straight into introducing
yes,
people? Okay, fantastic.
and if you'd like to do that, did you know, we can actually also do that. It's up to you.
We have a quick time for a quick did you know fact as we send Alejandro off with here we go. So we should be bringing one up. Yes, okay, fantastic. So, oh, it's got my name in the middle of it. So, did you know of all articles on media published in over 130 journals during 2017 and 2018, 23% were focused on social media, with a whopping 35% of that taking Egypt as a primary case study. So that's one from our peer-reviewed articles database, and we'll be shouting out all of the folks that work on to produce those stats at the end of the podcast. Thank you so much, Alejandro, and I'll just start to introduce Peter.
Thanks,
now.
Alejandro.
Thanks. Peter, thank you so much for coming on. Dr. Peter Mandaville is a professor of international affairs at the Scarborough School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. From 2015 to 2016, he served as senior advisor in the Secretary of State's Office of Religion and Global Affairs, where he led that office's work on ISIS and sectarian conflict in the Middle East. Peter is the author of books on Islam and politics and transnational Muslim politics, reimagining the Ummah, as well as many journal articles, book chapters, op-ed commentary pieces in outlets such as International Herald Tribune, The Guardian, The Atlantic, and Foreign Policy. He has testified multiple times before the US Congress on topics including political Islam and human rights in the Middle East. So welcome, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
Ahlan, Peter.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Hi, Bassam. It's great to be with you both today.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us.
Have you got some special sound effects lined up?
No, I felt when I was listening to Alejandro, I thought, how can I top that? I have, I'm sitting in this sort of deathly silent institutional-looking space with no such special audio surprises.
That's too bad.
Okay, great. So, Bassam, I don't know if you wanted to contextualize the Islam module slightly more. Before we start talking to Peter, we had the kind of brief introduction at the beginning, and then maybe we can start getting some questions.
Yes, I'd like to, first of all, double welcome Peter for joining us and share that he is coordinating and running the Islam teaching module on MESPI, which I started talking about a little bit early on in the episode. The teaching modules are essentially one of the more extensive projects at the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative project, which aims at providing educators with various lesson plans on different topics and countries and themes that will address the introductory to intermediate level, starting with upper level secondary education all through college, as a way of providing an alternative to the often low-hanging fruit or problematic literature that is used to address certain topics such as Islam, gender, and other topics of the sort. And we have put together a framework that allows for experts like Peter and his team of educators and professors and researchers to join in and produce these lesson plans that are interactive, as well as somewhat community based, in the sense that once this is up, um, people within the community of educators in Middle East studies will be able to chime in, will be able to offer their recommendations, their suggestions, and the module will interactively grow as a function of these. Of this type of input. So I'll stop here and ask Peter to tell us a little bit about the Islam teaching module, which does happen to be, along with the gender teaching module, which is also underway, but a bit behind the Islam teaching module. These two topics happen to be the most sought after topics in any sort of instruction on the region, in the United States, at least. I'm pretty certain this might be the case in many other places. So this for us is a major pioneering effort. So welcome, Peter, and thank you for taking this gigantic job on. And I know that we are already, not just, in the Islam module, we're already under some fire for pretending to be able to introduce or teach any topic, let alone Islam, in
Yeah.
1 to 3 week lessons. So I know
Yeah.
this is a challenge, except that we'd rather provide a workable alternative that is sound compared to the really problematic and distorted material that's being offered.
Which is exactly our starting point, Bassam. And I think also we started this work knowing that, or feeling that there was this an enormous burden on our shoulders, just because we know that the levels of misinformation, disinformation, just general lack of understanding or contextualized understanding about Islam is kind of off the charts. And so, what we did was we put together, given the scope of what is encompassed by Islam, we put together a fantastic multidisciplinary team composed primarily of our colleagues here at the Alivar Al-Aq Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason University, which was sort of the home of the MESPI Islam module. But that said, we also had fantastic support from some really stellar and incredibly well-known scholars outside the Mason community, such as Professor Ahmed Dalal, who of course has recently started as the new president of the American University in Cairo. He somehow, amidst everything else he was doing, found time to join us and pitch in some great ideas. So, yeah, given the kind of scope of what's covered, we felt that we definitely needed historians, we needed scholars of religion, we needed social scientists, and so, our great colleague, Professor Sumaya Hamdani here at Mason, helped to cover the history angle. Our colleagues, Maria De Cake, took the primary lead on religious studies. But our colleague, Professor Aziz Sashedina, who is, of course, himself a fairly towering figure in contemporary Islamic thought, also pitched in there. I was able to cover much of the social sciences side of things, but I'm a political scientist, and American political science, as many of you know, has certain flavors to it, shall we say, and certain methodological parameters that sometimes constrain that work. So we were very lucky to also have participation from sociologists and anthropologists, such as our colleagues Courtney Hughes-Rinker and Yasmin Ipek. So just a great team effort, bringing in a lot of perspectives. But one thing that was a major challenge throughout, and I also have to recognize and give enormous credit to Alex Hayes, who is a good colleague and friend of the center, a graduate of our Middle East and Islamic Studies program, currently pursuing additional graduate study out in Doha. Just did a fantastic job to keep the process together and keep it running together, and to work tirelessly with these many colleagues and the many different perspectives they bring. But like the real challenge we had is precisely trying to achieve some fit and alignment between the structural requirements of MESPI, in terms of structuring the material that's provided to instructors in these, fairly small bite-sized chunks, to kind of align that with the pedagogical need deeply felt by some of our colleagues to make sure that students understand the basics of Islam before they start exploring specific things like the intersection of Islam and gender. And so some colleagues on this committee kind of leaned a little bit more in the direction of kind of saying, look, we have to make sure they fully understand the Quran and Hadith and the entirety of Islamic history before they do anything else. And we had to figure out how to reconcile that sense of pedagogical responsibility to provide enormously fulsome context with the realities of the system that we were trying to build. But I think we figured it out by and large, and are on our way there to having a nice and really unique and I hope very useful product to offer to our users.
And in fact, there, Peter actually anticipated our next question, which was about the challenges of making this sort of syllabus on such a broad and foundational topic. What do you see as the benefits for providing such guidance to educators that might be less familiar with teaching the Middle East?
Oh, Jessica, I only mentioned one of the challenges we faced. We could do like a 45-minute segment just on some of the other challenges. So what I mentioned just a moment ago was kind of the internal challenge of sort of different perspectives on the part of the committee members about how we should approach this work. I think one that we all felt was, and it goes very directly to the specific question you just asked, was the idea that there are certain MESPI modules, and I think we're going to be learning more about the one that's probably made the most progress, the environment module, the Middle Eastern environment module, a little later in the show. There are some modules that by their nature are somewhat more constrained in scope. Whereas, just the enormity of what is encompassed by the topic of Islam or the Islam module really from the outset had us kind of scratching our heads to figure out, well, we can't include the entirety of Islam historically, geographically, thematically in this module. So we have to be selective. And so what should be our guiding principle? Should it be the kinds of questions we assume are most frequently asked by instructors, or the topics that most instructors want to engage because they tend to generate the highest levels of confusion or lack of contextualized understanding? Or should we just try to actually cover the full range of everything that needs to be covered, as it were? And I think at the end of the day, we've managed to kind of structure this module around a series of kind of sub-modules that are tied to issues that tend to generate a lot of discussion, such as Islam and gender, or the relationship between Islam and politics, or the question of Islamic law. What is Sharia, and how should one think of that, and what it means in practice? And so we know that those are some of the kinds of topics that tend to generate the greatest amount of interest. And so, that figuring that piece out was a challenge, but also kind of trying to anticipate what our use cases might be, in the sense of what kinds of instructors are going to come to this resource looking to find good quality, authoritative and reliable material that they can plug into any number of different kinds of classes, from an advanced secondary school teacher that kind of needs something that's more in the vein of just correcting a broad set of misconceptions about Islam, to an upper division undergraduate instructor who's teaching a course on the Middle East and is themselves a specialist in Middle East studies, but wants to, when they cover, say, the intersection of Islam and politics in the Middle East at present, make sure that they are able to benefit from the state of the art, as it were, in terms of where the scholarship and literature is currently at on that topic.
Thanks, Peter. This is remarkable. I actually think that at some point we would love to speak with the module coordinators to flesh out a lot of these discussions. In other words, have like a whole episode or something about these specific modules that is much more in depth. But let me ask you this, at the risk of sounding too rudimentary, can you share with us, just as quickly as you'd like, a couple of dominant misconceptions at the more basic level regarding Islam, and at the more advanced level, something that is beyond the introductory and basic levels, that you would like this module, you and your colleagues would like this module to correct. And I know that it's not an easy choice because there are many.
Yeah, I mean, that's really one of those, oh my God, where to even start type questions. I mean, one thing that I encounter a lot at every level that I have engaged professionally, from, K to 12 educational settings up to advising secretaries of state, is misunderstanding and misconception about the nature of Islamic law, about Sharia, in the sense that there is like this book that has all the Sharia in it. And when you want to know what Islamic law says about some or other issue, you find this huge Sharia book, and it's this big, massive, dusty thing, and you drop it, it's so there's my sound effect. It's probably not as good as Alejandro's, but you drop this thing, you open it, and you search through it until you find, what Islamic law says about any issue, and it's all there. It's written down because it's law, and laws are statutes, and it's that's how law works. And to help people understand that that jurisprudence, understandings and practices of rule of law, in Islam don't function that way. And yet, at the same time, it is still quite possible to have a very specific and informed conversation about how Sharia law has contended with issue A, B, or C, but you need to understand some more fundamental things about the nature of what jurisprudence and the jurisprudential process looks like in order to understand how Islamic law operates in practice. So I think that is one of the most common misconceptions that we find, across a wide range of levels. And then, the sort of standard stuff that you would expect about, Islamic views on violence, and the extent to which violence is sometimes understood to be an inherent aspect of religion, or the spread of Islam as a religion. Certain conceptions about Islam as a religious tradition that is inherently repressive towards women, which is tricky, because there are many aspects of Islam, or aspects of practices, laws, customs in Muslim majority societies that are understood to be derived from Islam, that are incredibly repressive towards women. But again, it's one of these things where you need to make sure that people understand the combination of the text and the context, and the ways in which these supposedly inherent features of Islam are actually products of the history of human beings interacting with Islam, being Muslim, inhabiting their Muslimness in multiple settings, which are themselves characterized inevitably by very specific social relations of power, which then get reflected in the way that religion is understood and interpreted and practiced. And so I'm hoping that the resources that we've put together for the MESPI Islam module does a very nice job of kind of picking up on those kinds of themes and challenges. One final thing I'd say here, just in terms of what's maybe a little distinctive about this, and maybe a little counterintuitive, because obviously this bigger endeavor that we're part of is the Middle East Studies Pedagogical Initiative. So it has an area studies framing around it. to some extent. We have always at the Ali Verlag Center for Global Islamic Studies, as is reflected in our title, we've tried to resist an area studies approach to Islam, and have worked sometimes to deliberately decenter the Middle East and the Arab world from conversations about Islam, just because there's often been, I think, a tendency in the United States and other countries to teach Islamic studies almost as a subsidiary of the Middle East. Like, it's something you find in the Middle East, Islam. But of course, demographically today, in terms of where most of the world's Muslims are located, Islam is primarily a South Asian and Southeast Asian religion. So we've tried in this module that we've put together to reflect that global paradigm for Islamic studies that we hope is kind of the hallmark characteristic of our center.
Thank you so much. I have about 16 or 17,000 questions, but I'll just hold off for now. We Jessica, how about if we bring in Peter and our next awesome guest on the environment module for like a more lengthy discussion at some point? We can call it like search files extra, like
That sounds
ESPN.
good. We'll have to see if we can find another pun on the title, perhaps.
We
Yeah.
could, because I'd love, because you did not mention anything about the conception that Islam is evil. So maybe we can talk about that at another time.
Yeah, that sounds like a great feature for the extras thing.
The bloopers, perhaps. Right, okay. Before you go, Peter, or before we bring in Camille, our next guest, last time we spoke, having a serious discussion about our MESPI modules, you also dropped in at the last moment that you're an amateur radio expert, and I wondered if you could share another fun tidbit such as 73, which is best wishes, if I remember correctly.
So I'm not an amateur radio expert. Any amateur radio expert would laugh at the idea that I am that. I am a licensed amateur radio operator. I have a license, but it's a family thing. My father and my elder brothers were really big into it. And I think the interesting tidbit for this group is maybe not so much this sort of fantastic set of shorthand codes that amateur radio operators use to communicate with each other quickly. So like when you end a amateur radio communication, it's kind of traditional to say 73s, which translates as best regards. And there's dozens and dozens of these codes. But for this Middle East studies crowd, so my father grew up in part in Saudi Arabia in the late 1940s, and this was before the Saudi government had banned private radio transmission. So he was able to actually operate as a licensed amateur radio operator in Saudi Arabia. And when the intergovernmental body that assigns country codes for ham radio, for amateur radio operation, was doing its thing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Saudi Arabia didn't exist. And the parts of it that they felt were relevant were simply the Ottoman run areas where there were railroad operations in effect. And so the code they chose for Saudi Arabia was HZ for the Hijaz Railway. And so my father used to operate a station in Saudi Arabia in the late 1940s with the call sign HZ.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. Bassam, maybe we have time for a quick fun fact before we move on to our next guest. What do you think?
Absolutely. Always time for fun facts.
Always time for a fun fact. Brilliant. Peter, we'll keep you on the line just for now. Okay, brilliant. So did you know that between 1979 and 1999, 38 different books were published and publicized as translations of the Quran or select passages from it? That was a fact from our books database. And again, we'll be shouting at the books database authors at the end of the call. For now, hopefully the next guest
and before
should be...
yes,
yeah.
I want to bring in Camille visually before Peter leaves. So yeah, go ahead, feel free. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm doing that.
Perfect. Okay, brilliant. And then I'll start off introducing Camille. Hi, great to see you. How are you?
Hi, Camille.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. So Camille is a junior research fellow at Jesus College at the University of Cambridge and a historian of the modern Middle East, focusing on the late Ottoman Empire, so perhaps quite interested in that Hijaz railway fact that Peter just shared. Her current research explores how local elites shaped the emergence of capitalism and modern state practice in the Persian Gulf port city of Basra. Another project addresses the intellectual and environmental history of the concession across Latin America and the Middle East, and previously she worked on infrastructure and development projects in Iraq and Iran. So Camille, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Bassam, did you want to share any words while we have both Peter and Camille kind of in the room?
Yes, I just want to say that it is remarkable that our first two teaching modules are proceeding in a manner that we did not even anticipate. It's extremely productive, insightful, and these two modules are serving as the blueprint for the others that are coming up, including the gender module, module on Iran, module on Algeria, module on political economy, and these are just the beginning. So I just wanted to thank Camille and Peter for heralding this process with Camille and her team at the environment. I typed your last name and added it to your first name while I was talking, so I hope that wasn't too disruptive, was it? Okay, good.
I didn't even notice.
I didn't even notice. I just wanted to make sure nobody else did. Yes, thank you, Camille, and the rest of the Environment Page team, co-editors at Jadaliya for and beyond Jadaliya for running this module. And we chose something other than Islam to start with because we wanted to also touch on topics that so many of us would like to introduce into their into the classroom, but like myself, I wouldn't know where to start as far as introducing environmental studies into the classroom. So this was a fantastic way to start, and thank you for doing a stellar job. And I assume, or I understand that this is close. You are close to the finish line, although the finish line is not there yet.
Yeah, that's right. We continue to be close to the finish line. I would say we've been close for a while.
That's awesome. That's how it is. It's like when you finish a documentary and you think you're done, and that's when the work starts sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant. Okay, so Camille, the Environment Page on Jadaliya, as you know, was founded about a year and a half ago, and it's really exciting to now be speaking about a teaching module that basically seeks to disseminate a lot of that really current research and thinking. Could you, before we get into the details of the module, perhaps speak a bit about your own research and how it links to the environment?
Yeah, sure. So obviously you already mentioned that I work on Iraq and the Persian Gulf in the late Ottoman period, so mostly the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And the book that I'm working on right now is basically about the changing relationships between people and land. So both how people are trying to accumulate land as property, and then also how they talk about their own sense of political belonging. And like, obviously, those are some of the biggest and most classic topics of 19th century history. But what I'm interested in partly is in thinking about, how this sort of classic story goes if we take the land seriously, if we take the environment seriously as an active part of it, and not just as like a canvas for the stories of modernization or whatever. So just as an example, a lot of the places that I'm thinking about, a lot of southern Iraq in the 19th century was either marshland or sort of adjacent to marshland. And that mattered, for how people tried to own the land, for how officials thought about what the land could be, for how things like land deeds did function or did not function. And yeah, so I guess for me in general, the important thing is taking the environment seriously as part of these other kinds of history, and then also thinking about other kinds of history as part of environmental history, like not thinking about the environment as something that's separate from the rest of our lives.
Awesome. That sounds like a great jumping off point, especially as some kind of indicated for Middle East studies educators who are specialized in a different discipline, and then coming through and trying to incorporate environment more in their work. So yeah, could you perhaps speak more specifically about the module, about what made you interested in developing it, and perhaps if you see this as an overlooked topic within Middle Eastern studies so far, and how do you imagine this module overcoming that, I suppose?
Yeah, well, okay, that's maybe a tall order to overcome all of the ways that the environment is overlooked. But I mean, as for like how I became interested in developing this, so it goes back a couple of years to when I did this summer program in political economy, and Bassam pitched the idea of MESPI in general, not just the environment model, but the Middle East Studies Pedagogy project to us at the end of the program. And that was really appealing to me just because I think, I'm sure that you've talked about this on the podcast before, but like lots of teachers do need better materials on the Middle East. Anyone who's teaching, like a intro to world geography, or high school teachers teaching world history. And I do think that applies doubly to the environment. I mean, I think Bassam, you're not alone. I think there's a lot of people out there who are experts on the Middle East who would like to teach on the environment. I think a lot of students want it. There's this sense, especially like that's intensifying with climate change, that the environment is important. And then we see all these news stories, right, about like how the Middle East is going to be uninhabitable. But I actually think that, the lack of there is a lack of easily accessible pedagogical material, and most people are left with these really stereotyped narratives, Orientalist images, deserts and disaster. The Syrian civil war was caused by climate change, really kind of basic things like that. And so I do think that there's a real need for us to basically, well, how I think of the module is that we're basically curating material that's accessible for students and accessible for instructors without being either oversimplified or boring, or making the environment into something that's like, you can just set it aside and we learn about the environment and then we move on to all the other things that are important.
Excellent. That sounds fascinating. I'm really looking forward to it when it's doubly finished. So perhaps you could speak a little bit more in detail about the process that you and the team used to develop the module, and maybe introduce the audience to the 3 pathways.
Yeah, sure. The method to the madness. Okay, so the group that's developing this module, it is partly some people from the Jadaliyya environment page, but the team is also bigger than that. And so we're a mix of disciplines, including history, poli-sci, geography, comp lit, a mix of different kinds of institutions, points in our careers. And we basically first started out with a lot of just free-ranging conversations about what we wanted to do with this. And so the first thing that we did was create this, hang on, let me see if I can get it open, this massive spreadsheet.
I'm going to jump in while you're bringing it up and say, I think complit is comparative literature and pol-sci is political science. I don't remember any other acronyms, but I'm going to jump in there because I always find myself scratching my head when there's too many acronyms going around. So just in case.
Yeah, sorry for the academic jargon. Do you see the spreadsheet or no?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, it thinks it's sharing.
Perhaps if we give it 10 seconds.
Hang on. No, actually, it is sharing. I'm trying to share it. So
okay.
I'm going to ask you to try to do it again, because for some reason it is not listening to me.
Okay.
I think that's really odd, because once again.
Is it good? All right. I tried to do it again.
Yeah, it's something is going on. There we go.
Hang on, let me try from window. I mean,
Yeah.
this is just.
Do you wanna try again now? There was a bit of a glitch, and yeah.
It's all good content. Search files extra episode.
Yeah.
You see it? No, this is so odd.
I mean, I can just talk about it. It's okay.
Please go ahead as I try to make this happen. Okay.
Yeah, so basically the first thing we did was create this huge spreadsheet that you can't see, but it is on my computer, I promise, that everyone on the team just added sources to. And I want to give a shout out to Brittany Cook, who's one of the other team members, who did a huge amount of work at the beginning, organizing the spreadsheets and making it possible for us in the group to think about this in terms that we're not syllabus designed, because actually we're all academics. And so the way that we're used to thinking about teaching is in terms of syllabi. And so it was really hard for us to move past that and think in terms of a tool that could be used for syllabus creation, but like wasn't a syllabus. And also a lot of us, excuse me, are not used to working with data and spreadsheets. And so thinking in terms of like web design to build, what would we need to do to build this tool was really challenging, but that was great. Anyways, so we accumulated this massive spreadsheet full of different kinds of sources, academic sources, but also, novels, podcasts, films, graphic novels. And then we had to think about how to put it into 3 weeks. And so that was, we had a lot of trouble trying to think about how to make this, how to give people options for the different sources across the 3 weeks, but while maintaining some kind of like pedagogical usefulness. So making it useful as like a tool of instruction. So we ended up designing this structure to the module, which has what we call pathways through the material. So the pathways are basically these really broad thematic clusters. They're called flows, people, ecology, power, and the lived environment. And the idea is basically that these are 3 of the most important overarching themes that scholars use when they're talking about the environment across disciplines, across subject matter, across places. And so then, but without being kind of confined to one specific theme like land or water. And so within each pathway, each week builds on the one before. So for example, in the lived environment pathway, week 1 is sort of an introduction to the concept of the environment as a space that we live in. What does that mean for how we think about the environment? And then week 2 kind of like goes a little bit deeper and more specific. And so it uses cities, urban environments, to think about the city as an environmental space, how to, anyways. And then week 3 is kind of a little bit funky. It uses animals and animal-human relationships, to think about the environment then as a shared living space. And so each of the 3 pathways has that kind of basic progression, like introduction, a little bit deeper, kind of funky. But obviously, like, also instructors are free to choose they can choose however they want to go through the material if they don't like how we've put it together. And we also have this system of tags to allow people to search through the material. Like if they don't want to do something on animals, they just want to have a week on oil or whatever, then they can search and everything that's tagged oil will come up. And so people can sort of design their own thing too.
Sorry, I got stuck on mute there. Thank you for kind of talking through that process and for explaining through how the different flows and the different pathways have sort of allowed to almost anticipate building in that flexibility. But Sam, a little earlier in the podcast, mentioned about the future intentions of this syllabus builder tool to have a kind of community feedback aspect. And I really think the work that you've done in terms of these pathways will set that up well, and hopefully we'll be able to design a website and a tool capable of reflecting all of that work and thinking that's gone on behind the scenes. So look forward to that in 2022, I think. Something that really stands out about the module is the annotations that sort of guide the educator in making selections about which pieces to include. And it almost is sort of like a brain drain, or not brain drain, what's the right metaphor? Anyway, a capsule of what people were thinking when they suggested those articles, or how they thought they should justify them to their peers and other scholars. Maybe you could talk through why those were important to the team.
Yeah, no, that's such a good question. This kind of goes back to like why we came to this project in the first place, which is that we really wanted this to be a useful pedagogical tool, like whether for somebody who is a Middle East specialist but doesn't know about the environment, or someone who is teaching a class on, I don't know, environmental science but doesn't know about the region or whatever. But the way that we designed the module, it includes a lot of sources and topics that might not be considered strictly environmental. So, lots of the stuff on cities. Anyway, there's a lot that's sort of pushing outside the kind of traditional environmental topics. We've also put together things that aren't usually put together in a Middle East 101 kind of context, in terms of geographies and time periods and stuff. And also and geographically in general, we really have tried to push outside the kind of prestige zones of Middle East teaching. So we actually don't have a ton on Cairo and Beirut or Damascus. I mean, we have some, but we have a lot of stuff on the Gulf, on Iran, some stuff on Sudan, North Africa. And we've also tried to like branch disciplines and, include like literary sources, other kinds of things that teachers might be less familiar with. But so any of those things, might make it difficult, right? For someone who's unfamiliar with the material to actually think about like, okay, how do I use this in my syllabus, especially if they're just like busy and trying to, put 1 week on the environment in.
Yes.
And so, but we didn't want to kind of compromise on the kind of like complexity that we wanted to get at in the module. And so that's why we added the annotations. And so basically each source has like a 1 to 2 sentence thing that's meant to answer the question of what can students get from this? What is the pedagogical value of this source? Why should I teach it? And then we also have introductions to each week. And in each week introduction, there's a 1 to 2 sentences about each pathway. What is this pathway doing this week? And how does it relate to the previous week? And the point of all of this kind of abstracting, annotating, whatever, was to just make it as easy as possible for educators to incorporate this material, even if it's unfamiliar to them, or even if they're not sure how it relates to the rest of their syllabus. And we wanted to do that just because we want people to actually use it,
Yeah, which is, that's all you can ask for, right? To put all that work
Right.
in, you want people to use it. There sounds like maybe we're having a tiny technical glitch on the back end. So what I suggest is if we can possibly jump to a fun fact and then swap back to you for the final question, if you don't mind being minorly interrupted for about 30 seconds, that would be wonderful. But Sam, can we have the environment fact, possibly? Did you know that will work?
So if you're not seeing this on screen, something is wrong because I see it on my screen. So if you can just go over the fun fact, verbally. For some reason, the screen is not letting me switch things. So let's pretend that everything's okay, and just go over the fun facts, and then kind of figure out what the glitch was in retrospect.
Sure, no problem. So did you know that between 2010 and 2019, double the number of books on the environment in the Middle East were reviewed compared to the decade 1979 to 1989? And that fact is from the Book Reviews database. So brilliant. That was addressed purely to you, Camille. Sorry, I didn't know if you knew that before. There you go, there's a fun fact.
And Camille, you're going to be our hero for the rest of the show because something is not allowing us to switch the views. So you're going to be the face of this podcast as we draw to a close.
You are the third new host. Welcome. Well, in fact, and this is maybe putting you on the spot a little bit, but in a previous call, you mentioned that you might be a bit of an expert on flying, on aeroplanes in general. Do you have a little fun fact or tidbit, a little story for us on that?
Well, I guess the fun fact is that I'm a licensed pilot. When I was in college, I learned to fly single engine airplanes, just the little ones, with a propeller. And although actually like the unfun part of this fact is that I don't really fly anymore, both because like I ran out of money at a certain point, and then I decided that as an environmentalist, I couldn't really justify like flying for fun because it's really polluting. And but I'm thinking that like maybe it would be cool if I lived in somewhere that was less flat than where I live now to take up like gliding or some kind of unpowered flight, because the feeling of being in a small plane is, the reason that flying small planes is fun, or the reason that I loved it, is that you can really feel the air. When you're in a jumbo jet, you only feel the air when like there's like a storm, something bad is happening. But in a small plane, and I assume in like a glider, you can really feel you're in the air, and the air is, it feels kind of material and tangible, and that's really cool. And so I would love to do that again.
Yeah, and perhaps actually linking it back to land and the environment. To have that sort of bird's eye view appreciation of the land, it's pretty unique,
Super
right?
cool.
So perhaps you can justify it later that way. We'll see. Brilliant. Okay, so we've thank you so much for coming on, Camille, and for talking through the module. Thank you for all the work that you and the team have been doing on it. And we're really excited to have you on perhaps in a couple of months or further down the line to talk about releasing it and celebrating getting out into the world.
Great.
Thank you very much, Camille, again. And one of the things that I would love to do, and we would all love to do at MESPI and the Knowledge Production Project, is as the module is complete, we would love to have a major sort of release with all of you, and kind of guide us who are people who are involved in assigning this material to a classroom, to guide us as to the best ways to incorporate environment into our various syllabi, which actually touches on almost everything that many of us teach, if it's of a contemporary nature for the most part. So thank you very much, and apologies for not being able to switch things up. We're not trying to put you on the spot, although your background and everything is awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, I've been appreciating the
no worries.
Right. So yeah, especially when you're talking about the Gulf and deserts and
Desert 3.
That was like accidental.
Sure. So Bassam, do you think we can do the final sort of thank yous and closing credits with Camille in the spotlight? Should we just run through?
Absolutely. We're just gonna go verbal. There's one problem. There's one problem though, Jessica, and Camille, is that if the system does not allow me to click the finish button, we have to continue this podcast indefinitely.
Okay. Okay, all right, I'm going to jump in then. So we have lots of thank yous today for some of the KPP team. Camille, I'm just going to address this to you. You're excited, I'm sure, to know that Shakila Omar was contributed a couple of facts from the peer-reviewed articles database. Also, Hannah Cowdell and Sarah Vertes, as well as Samantha Stringer, Sabrine Rashmawi, and also the brilliant Raina Newsom, who's been helping to put together those graphics to make the Did You Know facts very exciting and colourful. So thank you to everyone and to the wider KPP and MESPI teams in general. And yeah, we're excited to bring you the next Search Files podcast. I'm sure you're delighted to know, Camille, in January. So look out for that one. Perhaps you can watch it as an audience member and enjoy the relaxing feeling of not being in any tech glitches. And we're excited to see everybody in the new year, I guess. Happy Thanksgiving to our American friends, and we'll look forward to catching up with everyone in 2022.
A progressive Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Oh yes, being British, I forget the complications around it.
But by the way, Jessica, I just realized that you and I are in the background, so if we kind of like get more animated, people see that we're talking. Yeah.
Ah, right. So they're not just thinking, "Oh, this
voices are emanating from behind me."
They're not thinking that Camille is a ventriloquist. Yeah.
Happy 2022. We're looking forward to seeing you in January.
Yes. Sorry, everybody, about this. We will figure out what is going on, and this has never happened. Anyway, we've had other glitches to be sure, but not this one. طيب. Okay. شكرا كتير. Thank you all very much. Thanks, Camille and Jessica. I'll leave the last word for you, but thank you for aptly handling this podcast and taking it to the next level. And thanks, everyone. We will be back in 2 months.
Yes, and looking forward to planning that Search Files extra with Peter and Camille and the rest of the modules team. Big fish, little fish. All right, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.